Hello and welcome to Sunday. Okay, so in the last chapter, Air, we had our Jason, of course, was trapped in stone. He's now got all his air passages up and running. He is he's figuring out how he wants to get out of here. He needs to build basically a big tunnel, come up behind the man-made wall on part of the room, and figure out if he's going to escape through the passage, if there is one, or how far it goes. Don't know. With caves, sometimes, obviously they get very small or very big, or peter out, or who knows. Could just be a dip in the rock and they wanted to make the room nice, have a nice configuration. Anyway, so he needs to figure all that out. And okay, so he's got the idea he's going to start working on his soul creations and upgrading the miner for the first time. And so he said, what would be really great is if I could do all this work and find a way to save it. And Penny says, well, I think I can help you with that. And so begins chapter 46, Minor Detail. Okay, and just read the very last. You can always summon them again, right? Aggie asked, sounding confused. He didn't see the problem. I can. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I thought we were down here. I see what you're hoping to do, Aggie said. This is a project worthy of contemplation. I'll sit and think about it for you. Thank you, I replied. Let me know as soon as you have a solution. Actually, I might be able to do what you're looking for, Penny spoke up. Really? I asked hopefully. What did you have in mind? I've been absorbing your magic and returning it to you since I was born, she said. You're making these templates out of magic, so I should be able to just store the template and have it available when you need it. You'll still need to add your magic and soul to really wake it up, but I can get you started with the vessel. OMG, Penny, that would be amazing. I bounced up and down in excitement. If she succeeded, it would be a huge upgrade. Why don't you try it with this miner, I suggested. If it doesn't work, I can quickly recreate what I've done so far. I'd hate to put some time into this template and have it get destroyed. Certainly, she nodded and walked up to the miner. She put her hand on the miner's arm and, almost faster than I could follow, she sucked him up. It kind of felt like she was an alien and had eaten him somehow, which was a bit disturbing. I had to remind myself that no harm had come to the miner. It was just a magical construct. This was what normally happened when I sent one of my little creations to Penny, but now I was watching it in an in-depth view of the process. Penny stood completely still for a moment. I assumed she was processing the information somehow, and then just as quickly, the template of the miner appeared again. Is that what you needed? She inquired with a smile. I think so. Let me check, I said, and gave the miner a really good inspection. All the details were there. Penny, you did it. I gave her a big smile and followed that up with an enthusiastic hug. This is just wonderful. This is going to help me out so much. I did my happy dance, and Penny and Aggie joined in. I was now feeling a lot better about enhancing the miner, but I still needed a good idea to work with. I went over the details one more time, looking for inspiration. There really was only so much detail I could give this guy if I stuck with being realistic. There is a lot of texture in real-life clothing, but it just isn't that exciting. I wanted something different. I needed a way to enhance not only this miner, but every other soul creation I made, regardless of how real life it was. What popped into my mind was my last fight with Carl. His baton had been based on real life, with all the dimples and dings you'll find in a real fighting stick. But his weird balloon thing had been even better. I remembered it being made of swirls. Maybe I could come up with a fancy pattern and apply that to all my creations? I felt like I was on the right track, but it wasn't quite the answer I needed. Fancy patterns are nice, but I wanted to be able to zoom in, adding more and more texture to my creations. They kind of sounded like a fractal. Fractals allow you to zoom in and they keep on providing more patterns, like a snowflake pattern inside a snowflake pattern inside an even larger snowflake. That was the right idea, but it still wasn't what I wanted either. I knew the concept of fractals, but I wasn't a mathematician. I wasn't really sure how to implement them. My current style was more cartoon-like, which was great for quickly making new creations. What I wanted now was more like a container. I needed a structure I could build on. What if I thought about this more like a computer game? Characters in computer games are made up of triangles with a texture over the top. I'd always been fascinated with the CAD wireframe views of characters in the world of Warcraft. What if I did the same thing here? The nice thing about triangles was that I understood them. And it would be super easy to add more detail as needed. I could just take any triangle, draw a line through it, and split it into two. Then I could draw a couple more lines and split that into two again. It would be easy to keep that pattern going and end up with a template with an insane amount of detail. It felt right, so I got started. I put my first triangle on the miner's chest and filled it with the colors of his overall. Then I drew 3 triangles off that one and made their colors a shade different. Then I made more triangles off of those and just kept going. I played around with a few shades so the color of each triangle was slightly different than its neighbors. As I moved along, I got better at creating what I wanted and the pace picked up. The overalls were easy, but as I worked on smaller parts like buttons and collar, I had to shrink the triangles down and use a lot more of them to preserve the details. The process was harder than I thought it would be, but it was kind of fun too. It reminded me a bit of putting together a jigsaw puzzle, except now I was the one making the pieces. As I moved around the miner, I realized I'd focused on him as one single creation, but now I was forced to focus on every part of him individually. It was a different mindset, and it certainly allowed me to discover him in a whole new way. Once I finally finished and stepped back to review my work, I felt connected to my soul creation on a much deeper level. By focusing on every part of him, I'd been able to add all sorts of additional personality. When I textured the bottom of his feet, I'd added thick rubber tread to his boots so he could grip the ground better. When I textured his hands, I'd made creases for his joints and given him calluses. When I triangled his pickaxe, I'd added mystical lines and symbols. It was a magical pickaxe after all, and it needed to look the part. Just by adding the first layer of triangles, my miner was better in almost every way. This was an excellent start. Before I did my second pass, I had Penny save the template and tell me how many triangles I'd used. "You have 1,562 triangles," she said. Holy cow, that seemed like a lot. How long had I been working on this miner? I didn't have any way to tell. It felt like at least an hour. I've been hoping to do at least 10 passes of subdividing the triangles, but maybe that wasn't realistic. The process should go quicker now, as I wasn't having to lay down all the initial details. For these passes, I'd just take the triangles that were there and split them into 2. I started my first subdivision pass and quickly found out it was a bigger job than I thought it would be. I was able to go a lot quicker, but I was still adding another 1,500 triangles, and it was taking a lot of time. Plus, I was still shading both sides of the subdivided triangles slightly differently, and that slowed me down a bit. It was worth it though, as the finished template of the miner looked stunning. Every part of him had fantastic texture, and he almost seemed to sparkle in the light. I felt like I'd taken another hour for this pass, so I gave up the idea of doing 10 of them. I needed to get this miner finished and into production before too much longer. His template had about 3,000 triangles, so I decided to do one more pass and then see how he performed. I was about a quarter of the way finished when I realized just how big of a job this was. I was adding another 3,000 triangles. That was taking a lot longer than I hoped. It wasn't hard to do, and the whole process was actually rather relaxing, but it sure soaked up the time. After what seemed like hours, I was finally done. I had Penny save the template, and I left my throne room to test him out. Being frozen in stone again seemed so jarring after being able to move around freely in my magical space. I felt my claustrophobia trying to overwhelm me again, but I just breathed through it and tried to let it go. My current miners and ass blasters had been hard at work the whole time, and progress had been made. Most of my tiny air holes were open for business, and I quickly added fans to provide even more airflow. The main exit pipe down to the cavern below had gotten started and was about a quarter finished. It was going to be big, about 3 inches in diameter, as it needed to be able to handle a lot of volume once I got all the excavation kicking into gear. Once all the excavation kicked into high gear. Penny, I called, summon the miner template. This was the moment of truth. She could form the template in my center of power, but could she summon it here, in stone? I needn't have worried, as a perfect miner with over 6,000 triangles appeared by my hand. I called a nearby first-generation miner over to compare the two. The difference was staggering. My first miner looked like he'd been copied from a low-budget Saturday morning cartoon. My next miner looked like he was from a brand new online game world produced by a AAA studio with $1 million budget. Or a multi-million-dollar budget. As Blanche Devereaux from the Golden Girls would say, he looked mighty fine. When I filled him with magic, I could feel another difference. My new miner was holding about 3 times more magic than my old one. All of this was wonderful, but if he couldn't do a better job breaking up the rock, then this was time just wasted. I turned him loose to chip at the rock around my hand and waited anxiously to see how he would do. I needn't have worried. He started hacking the rock to pieces at a much faster pace. He was swinging his pickaxe faster, and each stroke was breaking off a much larger chip of rock. My new sparkling miner was exactly what I needed to tunnel through 18 feet of stone. I was going to absorb my previous miners and make new ones, but then I had an idea. Penny, can you upgrade the miners that are here now? I asked. I'd already given everyone here directions on where to work, and I've set up their priorities. I don't want to start over if I don't have to. I think I can, she replied. Let's give it a try. I chose the miner I'd been using as a comparison and told Penny to give it a shot. I had to call him closer so he was actually touching my skin, but as soon as he did, he froze and then upgraded. The whole process only took about 2 seconds. I filled him full of magic and turned him loose. I was pleased to note that he also phased through rock a lot faster than before. I called out to all the older miners and had them stop what they were doing for now. They slowly moved through the rock to the nearest part of me they could touch. Then they touched me and waited for their upgrade. To the nearest part of me they could reach. Then they touched me and waited for their upgrade. Penny was so quick. She started out upgrading them one at a time. Then she picked up the pace and started upgrading them like popcorn. My job was to fill them up with magic, and it wasn't long before I started running low on power. I tapped into Penny, filled myself back up again, and then went back to work, topping up the new miners again. I thought about asking Penny to both convert their template and fill up their magic. Thought about asking Penny to both convert their template and fill them up with magic. But they were my soul creations, so it's probably best that they got their soul and magic directly from the source. I was locked into stone, so it wasn't like I had anything else to do. Once all the miners were upgraded and back to work, I gratefully went back to my throne room. Once again I jumped, hollered, and ran around the room a few times. Being locked in stone gave me a bad case of the heebie-jeebies. My next project, of course, was to upgrade the ass blasters. When I had first made them from the rock golem in the park, or for the rock golem in the park, I'd modeled them as a fat worm with back legs. The last few times I'd made them, though, I'd modeled them more like a caterpillar. I'd given them lots of legs to move around and a thick body to mold sand or carry rock chips. I really liked the idea of a cute caterpillar, so I went with that base and gave him a green body and lots of tummy room. I added a big bushy mustache to match the miner's goggles, because safety is important, a wide straw hat to keep him nice and cool when he was on a beach, and a badge that said, "Eat and toot. No job too small, no chips too big." For his many feet, I was going to give him work boots, but they would be heavy and hot when he played on the sand. Instead, I had an inspiration and went with the winged sandals of the Greek god Hermes. He was supposed to be as fast as thought, and the ass blasters could use all the speed they could get. Now, he could fly up and down the tunnels and have a wonderful time. He still needed a duplicator and a resizer, so I added those functions to his goggles. I finished him off with yellow dots and orange racing stripes. He looked snazzy. I stepped back to admire my new template. The little guy had tons of personality and was cute as could be. I had Penny store him as my starting template, and then I got to work adding triangles. Once again I got lost in the work, and my mind settled into a zen-like space. My thoughts drifted, and suddenly I realized I hadn't checked on Carl and Marius in a while. "Penny, what have Carl and Marius been up to?" I asked. "Marius has been healing Carl almost this whole time," she reported. "I'm thinking they both spend a lot of time down here, as Marius set up 2 cots and helped Carl into one of them." "Did Marius say where he was during their fight?" "Apparently he was dipping his wick. That's what Carl said, and he was very mad about it. Why Marius would be making candles when electric power is so much better is a mystery to me." I laughed. "Marius wasn't making candles, Penny. He was having sex. He's a lover, not a fighter, so he was off doing what lovers do. If Carl wasn't with him, Marius would probably just be a harmless idiot. Continue to keep an eye on them and let me know if anything changes." Penny acknowledged the request and went back to playing ping pong. "Do what?" I did a double take. I now had a ping pong table in my throne room, and Penny and Eggy were learning how to play. I guess they'd picked up the idea from the game area in my apartment. Go figure. As long as they were happy and not distracting me, they could play all they wanted. The sounds of the volleys, pop clop, were rather soothing. I focused on the ass blaster again and got to work. His feet with the wings and sandals needed a lot of small triangles, and I kept that tight arrangement going as I did my first pass over his body. Once again, I got to know my soul creation in a whole new way. The racing stripes were nice at the larger level, but at the micro level, I started adding in other jewelry and colors like jade, emerald, turquoise, and peridot. Once I was finished, I stepped back to admire the bigger picture. My ass blaster looked amazing. He was basically a flying dump truck and processing plant, but he looked expensive and high class. He sparkled like he'd been made by a jeweler, and his racing stripes gave him the high-end sports car look. Penny saved my first pass and gave me the triangle count, 3,102. I decided to do just one more subdivision pass and bring his count up to around 6,000. That way he would have about the same level of detail as the miners. I got to work, and a few hours later, my new soul creation was ready to go. I moved back to my physical space and upgraded all the ass blasters. Once again, I compared the 2 versions, and the new ones looked so much better. That made sense as I'd spent a lot more time on them, but it was still nice to visually see how much they'd improved. Carl and Marius were talking, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. The sound was bouncing around through several tiny tunnels, and by the time it reached me, it was just a garbled mess. I hated being trapped like this. Penny seemed to understand what they were saying, so as soon as I'd upgraded the last ass blaster, I popped back to my throne room. Penny, thank you for all your help with the upgrades, I said. I'm going to let them work for a while and see how they do. Meanwhile, do you know what Carl and Marius are talking about? She nodded. Carl is talking about your fight and how surprised he was at how well you fought. He thought he was getting close to being powerful enough to attack the house. You almost won, so he's reevaluating everything. He thought you and Annabeth were going to be easy. He has no idea how you got so good so quickly. She paused, listening some more. Carl's going to switch his strategy. Apparently he was pushing all the stolen magic to Marius for him to hold, and then he was going to tap into that and magically assault the house. Now he's thinking about going more of a physical route. So I was right. Marius is the battery and Carl is the caster, I said. Yes, she nodded. Marius is very proud of his magical capacity, and he keeps finding ways to remind Carl just how special he is. That guy really loves to talk. Apparently Isabel used him to store her stolen magic first. Then Carl figured out how much capacity he had and started using him too. Marius says he was so big he could service them both. It was just wrong, but I had to laugh. I guess villains can be humorous too. The whole two-person thing, where one mage drains the victim and one mage stores the magic, was originally pioneered by Isabel, Penny continued. Carl's just copied it and taken it to a whole other level. Apparently the double process helps to limit the amount of contamination they receive. Carl's capacity is really low, so somehow that helps the process even more. Is there any way to scan these two and figure out exactly what their capabilities are? I asked. Not that I know of, Penny replied. I think you have to go through an evaluation, like you did with Sandy, to figure out what you're good at. I just know about their abilities because Marius keeps talking. I think he likes to hear the sound of his own voice. Thank goodness for that, I said gratefully. Keep listening and see what else you can pick up. So break it down for me, based on what they've discussed. What are Marius's stats and what are Carl's stats? Marius has a freakishly large magical capacity and a high magical regeneration, Penny said. The reason he isn't a super powerful mage is his magical flow is very low. It takes him a long time to push out enough magic to do anything. Carl, it's almost the exact opposite. His magical capacity is very small, and his regeneration is very low. On the other hand, his magical flow is freakishly high. Apparently he's had to go through a lot of training to learn how to control how much magic he uses. It sounds like when both of them are together, their strengths cancel out their weaknesses, and they make one really powerful mage, I said. Yes, Penny agreed, although Marius seems to think he's doing the most in their relationship. He likes to brag he has staying power, and he's told Carl that without him, Carl was one tug away from an empty nut. I'm not sure what that means, but Carl doesn't like it. It just means that Carl has sex very quickly, I told her and left it at that. I didn't want to get into the specifics of self-love and burping the worm with Penny. She already thought fleshy people were strange enough. If we got into particulars of shaking hands with the milkman, she might give up on humanity entirely. Or she might be fascinated by it. Either way, I just didn't want to go there. Anyway, back to Carl's plan. What exactly is he going to do? I asked. I'm not entirely sure, Penny replied. He said he's going to finish healing up. Then he's going to internalize the magic and grow stronger. Exactly what that means, I don't know. He said it's a risk, but he's got to do it. We talked a bit more, but I didn't learn anything new. I decided to keep an eye on the situation from the throne room without having to go back to my physical space. So I made a hologram of everything I could see with my magical sight. It wasn't very big, but it was nice to get an outside perspective of what was happening. I was surprised at how easily the hologram came together. I'd gotten used to working with glass and shaping things with my intention, so that certainly had helped. Plus, I was in an imaginary space, so making imaginary tools was easy to do. Actually, I wasn't sure what my throne room was. Was it really all in my imagination? Was it a purely magical place? It had to have some reality to it, as Bermuda had been here. Thinking about my fur baby made me sad. I missed his purrs and his loving looks. No matter how life got, he always made me feel better. Right, boo-boo? Right? Yes. You always make me feel better. I sighed and focused back on my hologram. Missing my kitten wasn't going to get me home any faster. Looking at the hologram made me realize I needed to explore a bit more. My surfers could phase through rock, just like my miners. I could use them to explore outside the limits of my magical sight and see if there's another way out of this place. I got excited as I realized the cavern below me might have a passage that led outside. I might be able to just dig down and avoid Carl entirely. I quickly gave my surfers directions and they started exploring and ran smack into the barrier around the warehouse. I'd hoped the barrier was just on the surface, but instead it was a full box. It went all the way up in the sky above the warehouse and deep into the ground. I was able to map the cavern below me, but I couldn't get past the barrier to see where it came from or where it went to. It was the same with the passage behind the man-made wall. I could see the passage was there, but I couldn't follow it. Damn. It hit me just how big of a lost opportunity this was. If I had been able to get my creations out through the ground, I could have used a line of flashers to signal for help. This sucked. I really wish Bermuda was here. Now I had my immediate needs met, and my miners and ass blasters were upgraded and working hard. I was at a bit of a loss. What should I do now? I felt down to my connection to my baby. He wasn't here, but I could still touch his magic. The barrier around this place hadn't cut me off from Eggy, so I still should be able to reach Bermuda. I touched his magic and felt him reaching out to me. He missed me, and he didn't like that I wasn't home. He'd gotten used to me being in the house where he could find me and get some love whenever he wanted. I tried to tell him I'd be back as soon as I could. Then I felt a surge. Now he knew where I was. He jumped through our link and landed in my throne room. I was so happy I cried. I kissed him and he licked me back. He wiggled and gave me little headbutts as I picked him up and ran my fingers through his fur. His purrs were like manna from heaven as I told him how much I loved him. Then the magic price of moving him through that much space hit me, and I passed out. I woke up in a cat bed, like a real human-sized cat bed. Bermuda was snuggled up as close as he can get, and he was ready to continue our loving. I was only too happy to spend some time with him, and for a while we just snuggled together. I was sleepy and confused as to where I was. Why were Penny and Eggy studying a hologram? And who was screaming? Wait, why was someone screaming? That didn't sound good. I sat up abruptly as it all came back to me. The fight, getting buried in stone, being in my throne room. That still didn't explain the cat bed. I looked around trying to gather my mushy thoughts. Oh right, Bermuda had showed up and I'd passed out. Since he had my magic, he could make stuff in here too. I guess he'd made a cat bed for me to sleep on. That was nice. That was nice, boo-boo. So who was making all the noise? Penny, what's going on? I asked. Carl has started working on his plan, she said. He's brought in a few of Ken's students, and now he's sucking them dry. I checked out the hologram. Sure enough, there were 3 people I recognized standing by the wall. One person was standing in the circle with the sucker rune, and as I watched, he crumpled to the ground. I was so shocked I didn't know what to do. I knew the containment circle on the floor was designed to suck out power, but it just hadn't occurred to me that it would actually be used. I'm not sure why. Carl was psychotic, and I'd already seen him take Cassandra's power. This felt different though. Cassandra had the sucker rune tattooed on her, and she'd been one of the mages that had killed and stolen power from others. She was not an innocent person. These students, though, they weren't bad people. They hadn't They hadn't been so thirsty for power they'd taken it from somebody else. They were just normal mages on a mini vacation looking for reconciliation. They didn't deserve this. Why aren't they running? I snapped. Why are they standing there? They are oath-bound, Penny replied sadly. From what I gather, Carl fought and conquered their whole school. He demanded their unconditional oath and they gave it. That saved their lives at the moment, but now he's taking them in the circle. How did he save? So, how do we save them? I demanded. Penny and Eggy exchanged glances. We can't, Eggy said firmly. We've been analyzing the situation the whole time, and there just isn't anything we can do. The only way to free the students is to kill Carl. You tried that already and he beat you. Now he's with Marius. He's got way more power than you can handle. Even if Marius left, there's no way you could come out of the floor and beat him in a fight. Crap. There had to be something I could do. I went through my list of creations. Grannies, belchers, octa, surfers, flashers, miners, ass blasters. None of them would harm Carl. My flashers and belchers could distract him, but it wasn't like the students could run away. They'd just stand there like they were told to. Eggy was right. Even if I could get out of the ground, I wasn't in any shape to take on Carl and win. The only thing I could do was make a successful escape and come back with the rest of my crew. Surely with the added power and skill of Sandy, John, Tyler, and Annabeth, we could take the two of them down. I wasn't going to be able to help these mages, though. And I continued to rack my brain, trying to come up with something that would work. I talked it over with Penny and Eggy, but they didn't have any new ideas either. This is just the end result of actions that have already happened, Eggy said gravely. They were dead as soon as they surrendered to Carl. They were his to do as he wanted, and now he wants their magic. Your opportunity to change their fate was lost when you couldn't take out Carl in your fight. Now the only thing you can do is bear witness to their final moments. The long minutes ticked by, and finally the student in the sucker circle crumpled to dust. Then Carl did something different. I thought he'd just go right to the next victim, but instead he seemed to be pulling the magic back from Marius. I jumped out to the physical world to get a first-hand look. It didn't help very much as I still couldn't see through Carl's aura. It looked like he was bringing in the stolen magic, compressing it, and packing it inside his body somehow. Maybe this was similar to what Big Ugly had done? He'd gotten huge, though, and as I watched, Carl didn't seem to be growing. I waited for a bit more, studying both Marius and Carl, but I couldn't pick up any more clues. Instead, what I noticed was how much room I had. The stone wasn't hugging me tightly like it had before. I now had about 4 inches of space all around, so I could actually move a bit. It still wasn't complete freedom, but it was progress. The 3-inch wide shaft to the cavern below was completed and open for business. Miners were chipping at the rocks and slowly creating my escape. Ass blasters were eating the chips, flying over to the evacuation shaft and dumping their loads. The plan was working. Carl finished packing the magic into his body and directed the next mage to stand in the circle. This was the woman who'd been screaming when I woke up, but now she was just sobbing softly. She tried to fall over and crawl away, but her oath made her get back on her feet and step into the circle. She just stood there as Carl activated and slowly began extracting her magic. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. Marius seemed to flirt with everyone, and I could see one of the final 2 students flirting back. I guess she thought she could influence Marius and stay alive. It was a final Hail Mary attempt, and it was worth a try, even though I knew it wasn't going to succeed. Marius seemed bored, so I guess he decided to see just how far he could push it. He started out nice as he talked her out of her clothes, but then he started getting rough. He spit in her face and slapped her over and over again. She just took it and kept coming back for more. I mean, what choice did she really have? It was either Marius or death. Finally, he bent her over and started pounding into her as hard as he could. I had been thinking of Marius as someone who wasn't that bad. He'd seemed sort of harmless and a bit stupid. Now I realized he was as bad as Carl in his own way. People were just toys to him. They were just warm bodies to abuse as he wanted and throw away when he was done. The remaining student standing at the wall was freaking out. Tears ran down his face as he watched the casual violence and knew that he was the next to die. Carl, of course, wasn't bothered at all. He just kept up a slow, steady pull of magic as he stared off into space. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I jumped back to my throne room and started pacing. Eggy was right. Actions had consequences, and this was the end result of previous choices. I still couldn't just sit by and do nothing. Maybe I couldn't help these victims, but I could do something about the future. Somehow, I was going to sabotage his damn sucking circle. T was still keeping me at a low level of function. I knew I probably wasn't thinking as clearly as I normally do, so I talked it over with Penny and Eggy to get their feedback. "That is an excellent idea," Penny said, "and I think you might want to extend it beyond just the circle. You're in a unique position where they don't know you're around, and yet you can change their physical space. Maybe you could booby-trap the whole room. You're going to have to fight them at some point, so anything you can do to hurt them should be considered." "Agreed," Eggy spoke up, "but you're going to have to be very careful how you do it. You can't just destroy the circle, as they will know something is up. Also, if it stops functioning, Carl will just make a new one, and it might not be anywhere you can see. I bet with all his power, he could just burn another one upstairs in the warehouse and be back in business in an hour. You'd be much better off finding a way to reduce the circle's effectiveness. If it takes him twice as long to drain someone, that means he'll be half as powerful and go through half as many people as he normally would before you return with the cavalry and shut him down." That sounded like an excellent plan. I could weaken Carl and save lives. Win-win. To make this work, I needed to be smart about the changes I made, so I created a second hologram in the air. This time it was the sucker circle, the rune, and all the logical connections inside it. I also included the direction of the magic flow in all the channels. I was almost done when the student crumbled to dust and the circle shut down. With the magic gone, I could see the circle even clearer, and I updated my model so I included the height of the channels and every bump and dip of the stone. I also summoned 20 new miners and sent them to wait under the circle. Once I had my plan together, they would be ready. The first thing I noticed was about half the channels weren't being used. Once again, there were a lot of logical connections that did nothing. I let them fade out on the model so they were barely visible. The next thing I noticed was the channels had clearly been burned by hand. They weren't completely straight, and the depth of the channels wavered slightly. They were smooth, but the flow of magic wouldn't be optimal. Now, I just needed to make it a lot less optimal. I like to think of magic like water, so what would I do if this was a concrete aqueduct and I wanted to slow it down? I came up with two ideas. One was to create a series of dips in the channel, like holes in a stream. Maybe just disturbing the smooth walls of the whole series of speed dips would be enough. The other idea was to create a line of dips, but make them at an angle, so the magic would hit and right up towards the right. Then after that, I'd make the magic right up towards the left. If it worked, the magic would slosh back and forth, picking up momentum and spill over the edge. There were several main magic arteries, so I directed 10 miners to make the speed dip type change to one, and the other 10 miners to make the slosh style changes to the other. The miners got to work, and I soon realized there was a problem. The sucker circle was basically an open-faced giant charm, which meant it had lots of magic embedded in the stone. When my miners went to change the charm, they were competing directly against the magic used to make it, and they started breaking down quickly. Actually, given the amount of power it probably took to make this thing, they did very well. I originally thought they would be able to mine the whole line and still have magic left over. Instead, both teams got about halfway finished before they ran out of juice and faded away. I was very glad I'd upgraded the miners, as my normal ones might not have been able to modify the sucker rune at all. I quickly made 20 more and sent them on their way. I didn't want to waste magic, but this was important. Marius finished getting his rocks off, and now he decided to mess with the woman in a whole new way. He wanted her to attack her fellow student, and that wasn't something she wanted to do. She was already committed at this point, though, so she eventually started hitting the guy. Marius made the male student stand there like a statue and take it. Then the woman screamed and totally lost it. She started attacking the guy for real. She kicked him, hit him, scratched him, even bit him at one point. Marius giggled maniacally, egging her on the whole time. Carl ignored all the noise as he calmly pulled magic back from Marius and packed it into his body. When he was done, he asked Marius which one should go into the circle next. Marius got a big grin on his face as he told the woman to go and stand in the circle. She cried some more, but there wasn't anything she could do. Her feet led her over to the circle. It activated, and her magic started flowing to Carl. The final student just stood there, shaking. I watched her for a few minutes, a silent witness to the start of her final moments. Doing what Marius had wanted hadn't worked out for her, but at least she tried. If I got out of this place, I'd tell her friend she'd fought to the bitter end. I still needed to see if any of my changes had made a difference, so I zoomed in for a closer look. The channel with the speed dips were causing a lot of ripples in the magic. I wasn't sure how much it was actually slowing it down, though. The dips weren't that deep, so maybe I could dig them out a bit more and see if that helped. I had to be somewhat careful, though, as deep dips in the channel, no matter how small, might get Carl's attention, especially if I did this to all the channels in the circle. Before I made any plans, I checked out the slosh channel. It was a success too, but the results were a lot more noticeable. The dips caused the magic to flow up to the right, and it rode a bit high in the channel, but it didn't flow over the side. The magic then flowed left, riding up a bit higher. When it swung right again, the magic surged high enough that some of the magic jumped out of the channel. The channel was long enough for one more surge left, and this time it seemed like a lot of magic splashed over the side. This was perfect. Not only was the magic sloshing around and taking a longer path, but some of the magic was escaping into the air instead of going to Carl. That was the best possible outcome I could have hoped for. And now I just needed to do that on all the other active channels. I couldn't just keep sending over my miners the way they were, as I'd soon run out of magic. I needed them to be stronger and even more durable. It was time to get back to the template and subdivide their triangles even more. Alright, and this ends our chapter Minor Detail. Our next chapter is Slosh Lines, and we continue our Encased in Stone little mini adventure that we're having right here. Alright, hope you all have had a wonderful Thanksgiving for everybody in the U.S., and I will see you next week. Take care.